Okay, so welcome, and we're here exploring Pathwork lectures that I chose for a while to do the series of lectures that were compiled together in a little book, Pathwork of Self-Transformation, and you can get that on Kindle, which is where I'm reading from as well. So it's a nice little intro to the Pathwork collection of lectures. And we're on chapter 11, which is on the spiritual meaning of crisis. And so we were speaking earlier, probably that this might be an interesting lecture to explore in this, in these times. So, and the first little bit in italics is a comment from the editors. So we'll start with that. Sometimes it's useful and interesting. So it says there are moments and even protracted periods in our lives when suddenly everything seems to have come to an end. We are shaken to the very depths of our being by events that compel us to make difficult decisions, while our feelings are in such turmoil that we don't know what to do. Why such crises arise and how we handle the overwhelming problems that confront us at such times in a constructive way is the topic of this soul penetrating lecture. So now these are the words of the guide. Greetings and blessings to every one of my friends. What is the real spiritual meaning of crisis? Crisis is an attempt of nature to effect change through the cosmic lawfulness of the universe. If change is obstructed by the ego, the part of consciousness that directs the will, crisis will occur to make structural change possible. Without such structural change in the entity, no balance can be attained. Every crisis ultimately means such a readjustment, whether it appears in the form of pain, difficulties, upheaval, uncertainty, or merely the insecurity that comes from starting out on unaccustomed ways of living after giving up a familiar one. Crisis in any form attempts to break down old structures based on false conclusions and therefore on negativity. Crisis shakes loose ingrained, frozen habits so that new growth becomes possible. It tears down and breaks up, which is momentarily painful, but transformation is unthinkable without it. The more painful a crisis is, the more the will directing part of consciousness is attempting to obstruct the change. Crisis is necessary because human negativity is a stagnant mass that needs to be shaken up in order to be let go of. Change is an integral characteristic of life, and where there is life, there is unending change. Only those who still live in fear and negativity, who resist change, perceive change as something that ought to be resisted. They resist life itself, and suffering closes in on them more tightly. This happens in people's overall development as well as in specific instances. So let me pause here. Does this resonate with anything or any connection that you're making to any of these words?
Yes, I totally get it. And I've had situations in my life which were traumatic, I had a house that was blown away by a tornado, and that would probably be the most significant opportunity to, redirect and figure out what it was all about. So yes, I've experienced a lot of that. So
Yeah. And what's actually coming up for me, I too have, but I think it's like what I notice in me now more than anything, like oftentimes those big crises, it is huge, but there's some way that I've always felt somehow a little more I guess just shock carries you through, or I felt,
Right,
somehow, like helped through all of that.
right,
And it's kind of like the everyday uh crises for me, which is like, well, life didn't turn out the way I was expecting, or I'm standing in line and I don't want, like there's this kind of resistance to what is,
right,
right? And sort of my inner negativity towards that I'm really seeing now, how that kind of like depletes me energetically, and it's kind of like I think I'm kind of a will emotion type. So, there's a kind of, natural tendency that I have to go to the fight and the, aggressive stance a little more, so I just notice, that I am in this process now and seems to have increased this year. Like 2024 seems very soft and feminine to me. Uh, and so there's a way that I have felt, like just more relaxed, more supported, and more surrendered in general. And I notice how much better that works.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the day-to-day things that pop up are more difficult than, like you said, the major crisis. Your body does go kind of into shock, but sometimes, yeah, it's the day-to-day that is the most difficult.
Yeah, or the repeating, here I am again, or like sort of the place where we're stuck in frustration or something like that, that just feels like, that we're whatever we're not accepting in this moment, right?
Right.
Feels like sort of what is going to eventually create a crisis, whether it does immediately or not, you know.
True.
And so, yeah, and it does feel like in some ways, that we are so programmed, to kind of think about our own agency, right, and work from that place, which I think is good. I mean, the guide says we need to individuate, but once we've individuated, there's a way that then there's something much bigger that is really universal in a sense. I think that's aiming towards something and helping move things in that direction, and then that life force evolutionary movement where we're blocking it. It's kind of like you can't really block it, but we're going to get bowled over by it
Right.
because it won't stop. And I think the more that we resist, I mean, I think that's where sometimes physical health also, I guess, probably with the healing practice and understanding that you see that, where the psychological and emotional resistance then becomes a physical uh, crisis in somebody's life as well.
Definitely. Yes.
So, and the other thing I'll just say, like here, it says, like they resist life itself, and suffering closes in on them more tightly. Sort of the biggest lesson that I've had in my whole lifetime, it seems like, is like that when I'm, like sort of not holding myself in compassion, but am, sort of trying to, in that idealized self image or in that, active will, sort of unhappy with myself, or, you know, trying to, in a forcing current with myself to, sort of be somehow not how I am. And there's been this, beautiful understanding, and how, like even what we resist a lot in life is not life so much as it's who we are in life in the moment, and there's some way that we have difficulty coming to terms with that, and accepting, because I think we have the vision, we have inner sense of our potential, we have a culture that is constantly, sort of from the, you know pushing, to achieve and to accomplish and to, and so there's a way that like the deeper being places get left behind, and the richness of life gets lost in that. And I think that that's some of what, like people, it just feels to me like are worn out and exhausted in a lot of ways, and uh it's been a lot in this, continuous crisis and continuous change and continuous, happenings that have been ongoing in our world. And I think, it's not going to stop probably anytime soon, but that it really is a strong, challenge to our ability to integrate and work with that. And like the guide says, I think elsewhere, I don't know if it's in this lecture, but he talks about how even in a mass event, like depending on where you are in consciousness, how that's going to impact you, right? And so, it's like, even though many of us are going through, I mean, it's kind of like
I
COVID.
need to shut my door. Hold on.
Okay, sure.
I'm doing a Zoom meeting. Come on, Sparkle. It's okay.
So, yeah, so there's this kind of, universal, sometimes, like the whole, like large groups are in crisis and that kind of thing, but it's still sort of a relevant to our own individual response to it, our own, circumstance and our soul journey. And, so that not always is, the same kind of uh, crisis happening, even though it's like maybe a mass crisis in some way.
Right.
So, but for me to just remember, it's kind of like this life force, this divine, impulse of, something way bigger than in any individual, but maybe it's also within all of us and made up of, all of us. But it's kind of like it's moving someplace. I mean, I like this guy Brian Swim. And many years ago, it's quite outdated now, but he had this beautiful program called The Canticle to the Cosmos, where he sort of early on in our, scientific, beginning to understand, like this whole journey of the universe, right? And that how nothing has really repeated itself, and there's this new development moving through, and then on the earth as well, so that there's like this, tableau of transformation and change that seems to build on itself and seems to be even going somewhere, if we dare put teleological ideas into that. And so, there's this amazing realization in a way that if we look at, the universe, it's kind of got some kind of direction, I think, and process in and of itself. And that for me, when I feel like I'm part of that larger, movement, and I recognize that as a life force, it helps a little more, and having kind of this understanding of the going with the flow, right? Is usually easier than, resisting it, trying to block it, avoid it, deny it, that kind of thing. So it feels like the practice in a way is really learning to accept and be with what is, as it arises. And that's no little feat, right? It's like, and for the most part, just I've found really getting present in a sensory way, brings me into that heart and power of now kind of place that kind of lets go of some of the story and the ways that we can create suffering out of how we are looking at what's happening to us, right? The story that we're telling about it. And, it has spin, right? And that spin is based on, in the pathwork, like a lot of our images are old understandings, and traumas. And so that's often, where, we really get lost in painful suffering states. And then everything else, I think is often very much a challenge, but it's kind of like life is really an initiation, not a vacation, right? And so we are, always kind of being pushed to our edge as much as the universe can possibly take us without, destroying us, or whatever. And it doesn't mean that we don't also have times of great joy and pleasure and wonder on the planet. It's the lecture before this one I like a lot on infinite possibilities, right? And how, pleasure is our birthright and all.
Mhm.
But, it's also, it also stretches us. It also is meant to take us places where we wouldn't ordinarily want to go. and for us, then that seems like a crisis, right? So
Sure.
so human beings can be free and healthy in areas where they do not resist change. There they are in harmony with the universal movement. They constantly grow and experience life as deeply satisfying. Yet these individuals react entirely differently in areas where they have blocks. They fearfully cling to unchanging conditions inside and outside themselves. Where they don't resist, their lives will be relatively free from crisis. In the areas where they do resist change, crises are unavoidable. Let somebody new in. They didn't say who they were. Yeah. Hi, welcome.
Hi.
Hey, welcome. Hi, Lori. so, so yeah, we're reading through the spiritual meaning of crisis, and I think I'll back up and just start this paragraph because it says human beings can be free and healthy in areas where they do not resist change. There, they are in harmony with universal movement. They constantly grow and experience life as deeply satisfying. Yet, these same individuals react differently in areas where they have blocks. They fearfully cling to unchanging conditions inside and outside themselves. Where they don't resist, their lives will be relatively free from crisis. In the areas where they do resist change, crises are unavoidable. And in the beginning, the guide is talking about, crisis is like, the movement of the life force for change and, transformation and development is somehow blocked energetically, in cultures, in the world, inside of us, and where that, blocks the life force will, basically eventually create a crisis to, allow something new to happen in a way, to give another opportunity. And so it's like he says, even, they're unavoidable. Uh, in some ways, we couldn't really have our life without certain crises, right? They're part of the growing journey of life. So the function of human growth is to free one's inherent potentials, which are truly infinite. However, where negative attitudes stagnate, realizing these potentials is impossible. Only crisis can tear down a structure that is built on premises that contradict the laws of cosmic truth, love, and bliss. Crisis shakes up the frozen state. That state is a negative state. And on the path to emotional and spiritual fulfillment, you need to work intensively in order to free yourself from your negativities. What are they? The misconceptions, the destructive emotions, attitudes, and behavior patterns that arise from them, the pretenses and the defenses. But none of these would present too much difficulty in themselves if it were not for the self-perpetuating force that compounds each negative aspect in an ever increasing momentum within the human psyche. All thoughts and feelings are energy currents. Energy is a force that increases with its own momentum, always based on the nature of the consciousness that nourishes and directs the energy current in question. Hence, if the underlying concepts and feelings accord with the truth and are therefore positive, the self-perpetuating momentum of the energy current will increase ad infinitum the expressions and attitudes implicit in the underlying thoughts. If the underlying concepts and feelings are founded on error and are therefore negative, the self-perpetuating momentum of the energy current will compound, though not ad infinitum. So this is a kind of check against and part of where, you know, the crisis comes in. So to prevent, you know, the continuing momentum of the negativity from, you know, taking us further away. Any questions, comments? So they break this up and entitle these little sections, and sometimes that's useful. So this is a subtitle, The Self-Perpetuating Force of Negative Emotions. You know that misconceptions create behavior patterns that inevitably seem to prove the correctness of the assumption, so that the destructive, defensive behavior will become more firmly entrenched in the soul substance. So, right, this is where, you know, like he's saying, you know, like when we believe something, right, it's like that's the image, it's usually an overgeneralization, right? And it's a misconception. But, you know, it's like we can always, you know, say, well, it must be true because that's the way, you know, we've experienced it. And that's true as well. You know, we have experienced it that way. But he's saying that, you know, really we're experiencing it because we believe it. It's kind of like we think, you know, you have to see it in order to believe it. But the guide is saying we really have to believe it in order to see it. And so it's like a little bit of a catch-22. How do you believe something in order to see it? You know, he has some lectures on visualization, and, you know, part of it is really understanding, I think, to me, that, you know, what truth and reality is, you know, and you know, this a lot of times, you know, we're coming out of consciousness that, you know, has gone through a lot, and, you know, reality doesn't seem so benign, you know, and so there's a lot of healing and a lot of kind of relaxing, I think, more deeply into what I think is actually there. I mean, either that or I'm deluding myself, but the more I, you know, I feel into this and kind of clear my fears, the more that what shows up is this, you know, very loving and compassionate and nurturing bowl of reality, of, you know, whatever is behind the life force, this, you know, this divine presence in some sense that is within all things. And it has a certain very unconditional quality. And it's something that, you know, feels very healing compared to sort of the fears that, you know, my childhood images generated. And I think in some ways we do need, you know, to challenge the fears, but if we can't really feel some of this level of, you know, the divine, it's more difficult. And so in some ways, it's just kind of a practice of relaxing and seeing if we can relax into something like that, you know, that we can trust. I mean, if we lay down on the ground, you know, and feel gravity, kind of like the arms of the earth holding us, keeping us from flying off into space. And you know, we can surrender into our body and into gravity, I think, you know, and relax as much as we can. A lot more is possible. In some way, it feels like the most important thing in the spiritual path is to learn how to relax and to, you know, support our own self in calming and sort of slowing down and trusting enough to access this gentle reality that can, underlie, when we can let down into it. So, and most of the time we're fearful. And so we're pulling up out of this very ground of being that could nurture us and help us relax. So we're kind of like always in these vicious circles, these catch-22s, this, it's very complex and it's difficult to unravel it, but because, it's kind of like in these vicious circles and tangled up all together. So he's saying that the same principle, of um, applies to the feelings. For example, fear could easily be overcome if it were challenged and its underlying misunderstanding and mishandling exposed. But that's not so easy. Like fear is very convincing. We have trauma in our bodies. It's like, so he's not just saying, like just snap your fingers and your fear is done. But there is a way that it can. I mean, he says easily. Maybe I'm he's got one over on me, but and I think it gets easier for sure as we work with this. But in the beginning, I think it's quite challenging, but it's true that the way out is to recognize and challenge the underlying misunderstanding. Many times manifest emotions are not direct primary emotions. Fear may disguise rage. Depression may disguise fear. The problem is that fear creates more fear of facing and transcending itself. And then one fears this fear of fear, and so on. The fear compounds.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I think, a big issue. All of the feelings sort of do that. So then, like when I go into my body and I'm working, through, it's like I can feel, oh, that's the layer of the fear, and I relax that layer. And I tell that layer, it's okay. I'm here. You can let down. It's just fear of the fear. Let's drop into fear and see what fear really feels like. Let's know fear. And I have to hold its hand. Or my hand, I have to be in some way supporting, myself from my higher self and adult spaces so that I can, walk and be the thing that the original trauma didn't have, which was an adult presence to help the child integrate and take away any shame that was connected with it in the first place, and help explain and just support it in moving beyond. And so we didn't have that help, and so we just held on to it inside because we didn't know what else to do with it. And so growing up around it, it still is terrifying in there because it's still like we believe it, the original situation, but that's no longer even really what's happening. Mostly what we're feeling is our fear of the fear. It's like we threw it in a closet and we put skull and crossbones on the closet and said, never, never, never go in there, right? And so whenever we get close to it, we immediately go into terror, and we don't even know what we're afraid of because we don't even remember what exactly is in the closet, or maybe we do, but there's a way in which, we can revisit that in a way that holds it, that can calm and transform it. And help us go into, through, and out the other side, which is, to me, what the pathwork is saying about, how to be with our feelings. Mm. Let us take depression. If the underlying causes of the original feeling of depression are not courageously exposed, you become depressed about being depressed. You may then feel that you should be able to face your depression rather than being depressed about it, but you are not really willing or able to do so, and that depresses you even more. This becomes a vicious circle. The first depression or fear or another emotion is the first crisis that is not heeded, nor is its true meaning understood. So we kind of often sweep it under the rug, the first touch of it, right? Um, Hoping we can avoid it and just keep going. Um, so it is evaded. So the depression about being depressed will set off in the self-perpetuating vicious circle. The consciousness of the person becomes more and more removed from the original feeling and therefore removed from itself, making it more difficult to even find the original feeling. The increased negative momentum finally leads to a breakdown of the negative self-perpetuation. So like we're kind of keep going in this direction, trying to make it work and it never does, right? And the more that it doesn't, the more we try harder and like eventually it leads to a breakdown. um, we can't keep going, right? I mean, often it's interesting because the will is very strong. So I've seen myself do that, like I keep going until I collapse and my will gives up for a little bit. But the minute that it has a little more life force, it goes back to trying to get it, do the same thing again. But it's kind of like, so in a way, because the will is so strong like that, we really have to kind of just keep coming up against the wall until we just like roll over almost dead, right? And it's in those moments where there might be hope, um, in some way, or at least, this pause in this unconscious, self-perpetuation cycle. Contrary to love, truth, and beauty, which are infinite divine attributes. And remember, all negative attributes are originally divine attributes, right? So it's just like we're all of our qualities are divine. Some of them have gotten distorted. And then some, are still, able to penetrate this earth sphere, like we have them within us. We can activate them, other people as well. So, then distortion and negativity then are never infinite, right? So this is the main thing that he says is kind of like the protection that we have, because truth, love, and beauty are always infinite and can, continue on. When we get to a negative or vicious circle, you know, if it were infinite, we would be in trouble. That would be truly hell. We would never have a way out, right? But in some of the lectures on the cosmology, right, it's like we now have free will. We don't have to live in hell, and these things aren't infinite. And there's a lot of, again, the universe is trying to help us, by kind of bringing an end. It's sometimes through what seems like painful crisis or, impossible situations. But that way is kind of the wall that we come up against until we can surrender. And so they come to an end when the pressure bursts. This is a painful crisis, and people usually resist it with all their might. But imagine if the universe were created differently and negative self-perpetuation continued ad infinitum. It could mean eternal hell. The negative self-perpetuating principle is most obvious in the case of frustration and anger. Many people can see relatively easily that the frustration itself is less difficult to bear than their frustration at being frustrated. The same is true of anger at oneself for being angry, or being impatient with one's impatience, wishing that one could react differently and not being able to do so because the underlying causes are not exposed and faced up to. Thus, the crisis of emotions, such as anger, frustration, impatience, and depression, are not recognized for what they are. Like he's saying, these are the first crises, right? Where we're just at the first level of those feelings. This makes the negative self-perpetuation stronger and stronger until the inflamed boil bursts. Then we have an obvious crisis. Crisis can put an end. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Was somebody saying something?
I just went,
Okay. Anything more with that insight?
No, I was just agreeing.
Okay. So crisis can put an end to negative self-perpetuation. So crisis can mean, if one's consciousness so chooses, the end of continually swelling negative self-perpetuation. When the eruption comes, the choices of recognizing the meaning or continuing to escape become more clearly defined. Even if this eruption does not lead to recognition and an interchange of direction, a final crisis is bound to come where the entity can no longer take refuge from its message. The personality must see eventually that all eruptions, breakdowns, and crises mean to tear down some old structure. Now this is kind of the study, right? What old structure is in my way, what old structure is in me that's blocking. Um, so as to re-erect a new and better functioning one. So, I went through sort of a long period of sort of a dark night, that was kind of like this, like a crisis in my spiritual journey and in my path that in a way, felt like when I looked back on it at the time, it was like it made no sense and I didn't understand it. And I was just, struggling and suffering. But, like coming out the other side, you begin to sometimes get perspective. And I began to realize, right, that what was going on was that there was, like my own inner authority, like was not strong enough. And so it kind of, the part of me that was had some authority kind of just got taken away. And I felt like I regressed for some time where I had no clarity about what was true, what was authority, what was right. Like even the lectures, I mean, they did help, but it was like I didn't know really how to apply them. And so there was just this kind of place where the structure of my inner authority broke down completely. Now, I also had a very, very hyperactive, authority in my idealized self-image. So I like major met inner critic and was bulimic for years and, like beating on myself continuously. And so, so frustrated with myself, so disappointed in myself and all of that, like somehow in this process, shifted and I didn't have any authority. And then a new authority was rebuilt. And it was rebuilt, slowly because everything that I encountered, I had to, like reconsider and, like understand from where I was then and from the highest place that I could and to kind of anchor it in my being and then test it, right? And so like there was this kind of breakdown of my personality and then this, somewhat rebuilding of it. Um, and coming out, with a lot more groundedness and a lot more, connection with divine and with myself. And so I think in some ways we all, go through this is like the soul journey at some level. And the descent is a part of the initiatory aspect of it. And I think the guide even says somewhere that, like in our life review on the other side of this journey, we would think maybe that the best times of our life was when it was great and we really loved our lives. But he says actually that we realize from the soul place, the deep value and we understand and really feel the gratitude for these times where we were struggling and often in pain. So there's this movement that is takes a long time, is inexplicable sometimes, seems like we get stuck forever. Um, and then other times, we're moving forward and taking steps in a more grounded and realistic way. So, whatever is not strong in us, kind of has to like get redone. And so as we go through, and again, I'm like, didn't realize I hadn't read this lecture before, but it seems like when I digress, then I look at the lecture and say, oh, he's talking about the dark night of the mystics, right? Um, so I really think that there is this is an aspect, the natural aspect of the spiritual journey. And the more, people are on a high, a fairly high path of the spiritual journey, the more likely they're going to, encounter these kinds of aspects and crises and challenges in life. So where was I? The personality must see eventually that all eruptions, breakdowns, crises meant to tear down the old structure so as to re-erect a new and better functioning one. The dark night of the mystics is such a time of the breakdown of old structures. Most human beings still fail to understand the meaning of crisis. They continually look in the wrong direction. If nothing would break down, the negativity would continue. Yet it is possible after a certain amount of awakening has taken place in the consciousness that the person does not allow the negativity to become too firmly entrenched. Thus, the negativity is prevented from starting the self-perpetuating cycle. So as we get more conscious and wake up to this whole thing, then, we can nip it in the bud, so to speak, and we see it and recognize it. So crisis can be avoided by looking at the inner truth when the first inklings of disturbance and negativity manifest on the surface. But a tremendous amount of honesty is required to challenge one's tightly cherished convictions. Such challenge cuts out the negative self-perpetuation, the motor force that compounds the destructive, erroneous psychic matter until it finds a breaking point. It avoids the many vicious circles within the human psyche and in relationships that are painful and problematic. So growth is possible without dark nights. I'm not sure I believe that, but let me see what he says. If difficulties, upheaval, and pain in the individual's life, as well as in the life of humanity as a whole, were viewed from this point of view, the real meaning of crisis would be understood. Okay, I agree with this. And much pain could be avoided. I say to you now, do not wait for crisis to come in an eruption as the natural balance establishing event that takes place as inexorably as a thunderstorm must take place when certain atmospheric conditions have to be altered and clarity in the atmosphere is to be reestablished. This is exactly what happens within the human consciousness. Growth is indeed possible without intense, painful dark nights, if honesty with the self becomes predominant in the personality. True inner looking and deep concern with the inner being, as well as giving up pet attitudes and ideas, must be cultivated. Then the painful disruptive crises can be avoided because no inflamed boil will form. The process of death itself is such a crisis. I have discussed various deeper meanings of death. This is yet another. Superficial death, that is, death of the human body, takes place because the consciousness says, I cannot go on any longer, or I am at my wit's end. Any crisis contains this thought. Consciousness always expresses to itself, I can no longer deal with the situation. If the situation is specific, a specific crisis occurs in life. If it is a question of one's present incarnation as a whole, then physical death will occur. In the latter case, the eruption takes the form of the spirits breaking out of the body until it finds new life circumstances in which to deal with the same inner distortions all over again. Since eruption, breakdown, and crises always aim at discontinuing old ways of operating and towards creating new ones, the process of death and rebirth signifies the identical principle. People tend to oppose going on to other ways of operating and reacting, however. So let me pause here. I mean, that was kind of a big thing you were saying about, death, and also, in crisis. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me for sure. I can't go on like this, right? It's like that's saying, we're already kind of in the crisis, I think, because we're stuck and we're, unable to find a way forward. And in a way, maybe even in that is a prayer, like help me break through. And then, be careful for what we pray for, but I think, again, we don't have to fear it. It's like these things really are benign in ways that we don't understand. And there is you know, our journey is really to trust and to surrender and to let go of, our fears and our pride and our self-will. And then we can find this new world waiting for us in a way. Anybody else want to comment on that part that we read? So I don't think that, just because, at some level, like when on the second one, when we're kind of no longer deal with the situation being our whole life, I think oftentimes, death is a gradual process, right? And so, I think that there is a way that it begins in that thought, but I don't know that that, is like necessarily the ultimate end result, because even in that process, there can be crisis, new understandings, new awakenings, right? And new choices made. Um, and oftentimes, some grace, something comes through, right? And especially I think when we can ask, when we can pray for the help that we need, it makes a difference. So people tend to oppose going on to other ways of operating and reacting. This obstruction is unnecessary. It is actually this opposition that creates the tension and strain of crisis, not the giving up of the old structures itself. So he's saying that it's not the giving up of the old structures, but people tend to oppose going on to other ways of operating and reacting. So I don't know what the difference is. So let's see. Let me keep going. It is actually this opposition that creates the tension and strain. And I agree with that. Like, when we're in resistance in any way, it's the resistance that creates the strain and crisis. It's not necessarily at all what we're resisting. It's our own resistance and not the giving up of the old structure itself. So if we could give up the old structure and not fear that, right, it could be a gradual or, blissful transformation of some kind that would not happen in the same, struggle and difficulty that it often does for us. So part of, again, our journey is trying to learn to relax, trying to learn to surrender, accept, and trust whatever is happening in life. When necessary change is not accepted willingly, you automatically put yourself into a state of crisis. The intensity of the crisis indicates the intensity of the opposition, as well as the urgency of the need for change. So the greater the need for change and the greater the obstruction to change, the more painful the crisis is going to be. The more openness and willingness there is on any level to change, and the less necessary the change is at any given moment of the evolutionary path of an individual, the less severe and painful the crisis is going to be. So, again, as we learn to trust and open a little bit, it's like we can relax into this process and integrate it more gently and more easily. But in the beginning, we can't help it, right? And so it's important, if we're in the midst of a painful crisis, not to judge ourselves or, anything like that, because, this is where it definitely calls for compassion. It calls for, knowing that we are doing the best we understand and our limitations are blocking us, and it's the help that we need, and it sucks, or it's very difficult. And so, we can sort of find a place to honor both realities and kind of hold this, this unitive kind of space for what's going on, and not try to make it into a good, bad, right, wrong, dualistic kind of one or the other side of things. So outer crisis and inner crisis. The severity and pain of a crisis is by no means determined by the objective event. I think most of you, my friends, can readily verify this. Most of you have gone through several changes outwardly. You have lost a loved one. You may have coped with the most drastic changes and objectively traumatic events, wars, revolution, loss of fortune and home, illness. Yet you may inwardly have been much less agitated and in pain than in situations that are outwardly incommensurate with the agitation of your inner feelings. Thus, we can say that an outer crisis may leave you inwardly in greater peace than an inner one. And we talked about this a little bit before. The objectively more traumatic event hurts sometimes less than the objectively less traumatic one. In the former instance, the necessary change takes place on the outer level, which your inner being accepts more, adjusts to better, and finds a new way of dealing with. And so sometimes even when we make choices, to change the outer situation, it comes from that and carries that kind of support. In the latter instance, the need for inner change meets with greater resistance. Your subjective interpretation of the event makes the crisis disproportionately painful. So again, the story that we're telling about it. Sometimes one tries to find rational explanations for such a peculiar emotional intensity. Because we can feel like why am I feeling so strongly about this? I know it's like people go through much worse or it could be worse, but we recognize, like that it's a space that it takes us where we cannot stand it, right? Explanations that can be, like we try to rationalize it maybe, and understand it, but sometimes it's, both inner and outer changes and crises meet the same inner attitude. So I lost my train here a little bit. Let me go back. So your subjective interpretation of the event makes the crisis disproportionately painful. Sometimes one tries to find rational explanations for such a peculiar emotional intensity, explanations that could be called rationalizations. Sometimes both inner and outer changes and crises meet the same inner attitude. When the process of the crisis is accepted and no longer obstructed, when one goes with it instead of fighting it, relief will come comparatively quickly. Once the pus runs out of the boil and the attitudes are adjusted, self-revelation brings peace, understanding brings new energy and aliveness. The healing process is at work even while the boil erupts. The negation of this process, the inner attitude that says, I should not have to go through this. Do I have to? This and that and the other is wrong with others. If it were not, I would not have to go through this now. That attitude prolongs the agony. This attitude seeks to avoid the necessary eruption of the boil. So this attitude is like fear, it's like it's the defense against, feeling this pain. And so that's telling us when we have that attitude that there's a deep pain, a deep boil that it's hard to, imagine, going into, but that's what's needed. And this other way will, kind of prolong the agony. But we can only get there when we get there. And so we try to avoid the eruption of the boil, which consists of a painful entanglement of ever increasing negative energy, whose momentum makes it more and more difficult to alter the course. The ongoing negative cycle and its futile automatic repetition that the consciousness is unable to stop generate hopelessness. So that's important, right? So the ongoing negative cycle and, this, it's kind of like it doesn't even, it's like it's being forced into us in a way. And in some systems, that are more understanding of shamanism and mediumistic stuff, the guide here is talking about energies, but these energies are also consciousness and also in a way beings, right? And so there's a kind of, force and consciousness and like an entity, that is involved in this automatic repetition or entities. And so that, the consciousness is unable to stop. And then it feels very hopeless. and we don't know what to do. So the repetition and the hopelessness can stop only by your no longer avoiding the necessary change. Every negative experience, every pain is the result of a wrong idea. A critical aspect of this work is the articulation of these ideas. So we have to bring them into consciousness so we can recognize what we believe, and then we have to question that. We have to crack that cosmic egg, like it seems true. Everything in our life tells us it's true, but if we can at least take a minute and just open, because if it's causing us pain, if it's causing us suffering, if that idea that seems to represent a fact of the world makes us unhappy, then it's probably not true. It's probably an image. And so when we can at least entertain that possibility, I think it helps set us free out of that, like maybe I feel like this is what seems true, but like there's a little hope maybe even in maybe that's not ultimate reality. And then to kind of like I like to reach out for the higher self, like what is truth? And then we can go to the spiritual laws and the spiritual principles to help us also compare, truth with distortion and recognize how that might not be true, in what way is it not correct. And so when we can, work with that, our own inner authority can recognize and make a different choice. And it's, very beneficial in that sense. So how often, though, all of we still miss the necessary recognition, because we just can't hold all of this in mind when we meet with an unhappy situation. And in a sense, yeah, we're possessed, by these unhappy energies and forces that live inside of us. And, we've been struggling with for a long time. And, so we just get lost in them. So leaving crisis behind. Once you take on the habit of first questioning your hidden wrong assumptions and destructive reactions, when anything unwelcome comes your way, and fully open to truth and change, your life will alter drastically. Pain will become proportionately less frequent, and joy will become more and more the natural state. The rhythm of growth can then proceed smoothly without the leaps and bounds of breaking up negative structures in the soul substance. So, like, again, we're all in various levels of this study, because it's just the nature of the ego to want what it wants. and whenever life doesn't show up that way, like surrender is the process. And yet, I mean, it's just amazing to me, and some things I can surrender, but there are certain things that it's just like absolutely impossible. And so I watch myself create much more pain, but just realizing that and seeing myself do it actually, in a conscious way without any recrimination and judgment of myself for it, it's like then I'm just dealing with the actual pain of the reality of the situation, which is, like instructive and helps me grow and change. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think, a lot again of what happens is we get possessed, and then we wake up and realize, oh, here I am again. And then we start judging and making ourselves wrong and feeling frustrated with ourselves, and our will gets in there, and now, we're not only resisting what was, now we're resisting the way we are. And then that kind of pain activates again the inner child abandonment or, difficulty. So it's where we betray ourselves again, where we, turn against ourselves and then recreate, our childhood pain within us. So any questions, comments?
I would say the part where, like, it's not us, but a part of us that is in conflict. Like, so that part of us that is in crisis, because not all of us is in crisis. So that part of us is in crisis, and it's our, like, it's hard to get that part of you to want to change when it's in that crisis.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's regressed and in a lot of pain, so I think, the first thing we have to do is let go of needing it to change. That's the ultimate goal. But like first we need to connect with it, and first we need to calm it down and, help it feel supported in some way and not judged. So, um, and then we can work with it, maybe, to see how we can help it change. We can invite it to change. But if we try to force, from again the will or the, like, oh, this is wrong, you have to change, then yeah, it's very difficult. And, we can't change from that position. We just can't.
Yeah,
It's impossible.
I think that, like, that has helped, at least, to kind of shed a little light on why we can't change from that position. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Good. So we have discussed the negative aspects of self-perpetuation. Of course, it exists primarily on the positive. Of course, it exists primarily on the positive side. Let us look at love. The more you love, the more you can produce genuine love feelings without impoverishing yourself and others. And you realize that you do not take away anything from anyone by giving out. And this is, real love, not the love mask, of course. On the contrary, more will come to you and others from it, and you will find new ways, deeper ways, more variations of experiencing love in giving and receiving it, being in tune with this universal feeling. The ability to experience and express love will grow in an ever increasing self-perpetuating motion. And so, like a benign circle happens, as we, risk giving out, as we find the connection with our own self-love. I think, and our own self-compassion, it opens to greater compassion for ourselves, for the others, for the world. And so again, this can be an expanding, benign circle. So it is with every other constructive feeling and attitude. The more meaningful, constructive, fulfilled, and joyous your life is, the more of these attributes it must generate. It is an ongoing, never-ending process of steady expansion and self-expression. The principle is exactly the same as that of the negative self-perpetuation. The only difference is that the positive process is infinite. So it doesn't lead us into crisis and, so like we can continue to expand. And I think that's ultimately, our task, beyond this lifetime, who knows where it goes. But, it's just a part of the nature of the divine in some way, it seems. And since we consist of that nature, that's our journey as well. So once you establish the contact with your innate wisdom, beauty, and joyousness, and allow them to unfold, they will increase themselves. The self-perpetuation takes over once these energies are released and admitted to consciousness. The initial actualization of these powers requires effort, but once the process is flowing, it is effortless. The more you bring forth of the universal qualities, the more there will be to bring forth. Your own potentials to experience beauty, joy, pleasure, love, wisdom, and creative expression, my dearest friends, are indeed infinite. Again, the words have been said, heard, registered. But how deeply do you know that this is a reality? How deeply do you believe in your innermost potential to be self-creating, to be in bliss, to live the infinite life? How much do you believe in your resources to solve all your problems? How much do you trust in the possibilities that are not yet manifest? How much do you believe it is real that the new vistas, that new vistas of yourself can be discovered? How much do you truly believe that you can unfold qualities of peace coupled with excitement, of serenity coupled with adventure, through which life becomes a string of beautiful experiences, even though initial difficulties are still to be overcome? Like you can have all of that and still have challenges and frustrations, but again, it's kind of like you don't take yourself so seriously. You don't take all of that so seriously. It's like the underlying ground is in this positive. And so when the negativities occur, they're like bumps in the road, and so there's more resilience, and, they don't take you into this place of, the little death, So how much do you really believe that it's possible, to have this, kind of life experience? I think we all feel it deep inside. I mean, I think that's a part of what gets so frustrated, is part of us knows that this is possible, or we want it, and we don't know how to get it. And then we try it in these old ego worn ways that never work. And then they just keep digging us deeper into the trench. And I think in a way, it's part of how the Luciferic or darker forces can take down good people, right? They're probably not going to talk us into murdering somebody or stealing from somebody or doing something, otherwise that, would cause our souls to, be darkened, but, or lose the light. But, we can, feel our potential. And then, if Satan keeps whispering in our ears every time we, lose our potential, or we don't kind of achieve our full potential, see, you're never going to do it, kind of thing, right? Then it begins to, tear us down, and little by little, and again, when we're unconscious and we're in these recreation processes, they aren't going to work. And so the, satanic forces can use that against us and start eroding our sense of our true being. So ask yourself this question. To the extent you pay only lip service to this belief, you will still feel hopeless, depressed, fearful, or anxious, entangled in apparently insoluble conflicts with yourself and others. This is a sign that you do not yet believe in your own infinitely expanding potential. If you do not truly believe this, my dearest ones, it is because there is something in you that you desperately hold on to. You do not wish to expose it because you do not wish to give it up or change. This applies to every single one of you here, and of course to everyone else in the world. For who has not the dark nights to put up with? Some have many little dark nights coming and going, or their dark night is gray. They may not be in a great crisis at any given moment, but life is gray and fluctuates comparatively little. But then there are those who have already worked their way out of this grayness, and they no longer want to content themselves with comparative safety from crisis. They are willing, deep within themselves, to chance temporary upheaval for the sake of reaching a more desirable steady state. They want to realize their potential for deeper joy and self-expression. Then the dark nights will become more circumscribed, experienced either as fluctuating periods of upheaval and joy, or in some lives bunched up in stronger episodes. Utter darkness, loss, pain, confusion alternate with heights of golden light, carrying justified hope for an eventual uninterrupted state of bliss. So, at some point, it's like we do begin to be supported, by this deeper truth. And then, again, the dark nights are not gone, but they're held within something, that we know is real and larger. And that can help us a lot. So it's a very painful and delicate and difficult time, when we're in this beginning of this process, struggling from, our limited ego consciousness to understand and find our way. Especially, because, usually we're kind of in our midlife by the time that we've worked so hard and tried everything we know, that we're at this point. It's kind of part of, I think, the message of the midlife crisis, right? And I think it's a natural place to be because we naturally need to try everything we know and do the best we can, with what we have, and then, we keep having the same struggle, then, it's kind of what I think propels us to reach deeper, to begin to pray, to ask for, this help, and even to ask for a crisis, right? In some way, consciously or unconsciously. So no matter how any one of you experience crises, there is always a message in them for you to discover about your own life. It is up to you not to project your experiences outwardly on others, which is always the most dangerous temptation, or for that matter, to project them into yourself in a self-devastating way, which avoids the issue just as much as when you project it onto others. The attitude, I am so bad, I am nothing, is always dishonest. This dishonesty has to be exposed so that the crisis can become meaningful, whether it be small or great. If you learn eventually to take the smallest shadow of your everyday life and explore its deepest meaning, you will handle the little crises in a way that makes the swelling of the boil impossible. Hence, no painful eruption is needed to destroy rotten structures. This will reveal the stark reality to you that universal life, untampered, is golden, joyousness of ever-increasing beauty. Every smallest shadow is a crisis, for it need not be there. It is only there because of your turning away from the issue that creates crisis. So take these smallest shadows of your everyday life and ask yourself what they mean. And some they're small, some are big, but those are the shadows. What do you not wish to see and not wish to change? If you face this and truly wish to face the real issue and make the necessary change, the crisis will have fulfilled its function. You will discover new dimensions of the issue that will make the sun rise, and the dark night will turn out to be the educator, the therapist that life always is once you try to understand it. Your capacity to cope with the negativity of others grows only to the extent that you can do what I explain in this lecture. How often do you sense negative feelings from others but cannot handle them because you are anxious, uncertain, and not clear about the nature of your involvement and interaction with them? At other times, you may not even sense the actual presence of hostility in others. Their subtlety and indirectness confuse you and make you feel guilty about your instinctive responses, but you are even less able to handle the situation. This frequent occurrence is entirely due to your blindness to yourself and your resistance to change. When you project all old negative experiences onto others, it is impossible for you to have adequate awareness of what actually goes on in the other person, and therefore you cannot deal with it. You will experience a magnificent new turn in your life as you grow in your capacity to look honestly at what disturbs you within yourself, as you become willing to change. Almost inadvertently, and as if it had nothing to do with your efforts, a new gift arises in you. You see the negativity in others in a way that leaves you free, that permits you to confront them, that is effective. It has no adverse effect on you. It must, in the long run, also be beneficial for others whenever they want it to be. So, interesting, and also in my experience, when we can shift and, come at this, and make that, then we have this new gift that arises in us. And it is almost magical, right? And all of a sudden we notice, hey, I'm doing this. And I never used to do that. Or, wow, did that sound great when I said it? Like, where'd that come from? It's kind of like the Holy Spirit is flowing through us now because we're not in the way and because we're present because we're with ourselves and we're with the situation. So when you resist change, fear grows because your innermost being knows that crisis, eruption, breakdown are inevitable and are steadily drawing near. Yet you resist doing what could avoid the crisis. What I say here is the story of human life. So don't take it personally, right? This is the story of human life. This is where human nature is caught. This is our evolutionary kind of Peter principle, like glass ceiling that we're all at right now. And it's part of what's creating the crisis on the planet. And so, we're all individually, but also collectively, being challenged to break through that glass ceiling now with this willingness and this deep level of the work. So the lesson must then be repeated until the illusory fear of change is exposed as an error. If crisis can be understood the way I show you here, and if you really meditate to understand your own crises and to give up what you hold on to and challenge the limitations you place on the particular issue, life will open up almost at once. So I'm, sort of shifting in my own perspective as I'm reading a little more in this, because, when we first began this, we were also talking about, this, collective crisis that the whole world is in right now, right? And so I don't know, I would almost have to read the lecture over again, holding that, as the topic completely, but we might kind of just sort of see, well, how do these words as we're reading here, apply maybe not only to the individual, but sort of to what we're witnessing in our world, in the crisis that's going on, and how might it inform us, individually, but also, help us understand what's necessary, or how we can help the collective or whatever. So he says, if crisis can be understood the way I show you here, and if you really meditate to understand your own crisis, and so in some of that, the world's crises create crises in me. I've been doing a lot of work, sort of trying to, let go of my own reactivity to what I see as the evil out there, and sort of, seek to find a more peaceful way of, again, seeing this as, this is a necessary crisis, right? And not hating, and projecting my hate onto other people. But also recognizing, that there are definitely, things that are more part of the change that we need to see, and there are things that are not part of the change. And to bear witness in a way to, change will happen, and the stuckness or the resistance to change will fall away in time. So it says, if you really, if we meditate and understand our own crisis, to give up what we hold on to and challenge the limitations we place on any particular issue, life will open up almost at once. You must also realize that change cannot be executed only by the ego. And this is so important, because this is kind of also kind of our inbuilt programming. We have to do it ourselves. The willing, conscious self alone is incapable of doing it. The difficulty of changing and the resistance to it come to a large extent from having forgotten that you cannot do it without divine help. Thus, you go from one wrong extreme to the other. One extreme is that you think that you are the one who must accomplish inner transformation. And since you know deep inside that you cannot do this, that you just do not have the equipment to do that, you give up. You feel it is hopeless to make yourself change. It's true. So you do not even really try, nor do you express the concisely formulated desire to do so. You are right to believe that the capacity to change is missing when you consider yourself exclusively as the conscious, willing ego self. Resistance is partly an expression of avoiding the frustration of wanting something that cannot be done and must prove a disappointment. Makes sense, right? Of course, we would resist that. So this extreme reaction takes place in the innermost layers of the human psyche. So does the opposite extreme, in which you profess the belief in a higher power or God who is supposed to do it all for you. And you remain in an absolutely passive state, waiting for it. Again, the conscious self does not try where it should. False hope and false resignation are only two sides of the same coin. Absolute passivity. But the pushing ego, attempting to go beyond its own capacity, must inevitably end in the same passive state of either falsely wanting or falsely giving up hope. The pushing exhausts the self and renders it passive. These attitudes may exist simultaneously or alternatively. The way to go about making a positive change is to want it. You must be willing to be in truth and willing to change. And you have to pray to the innermost divine functioning within your soul to make the change possible. Then you wait for the change to take place in a trusting, confident, and patient way. This is the absolute prerequisite for change. What a prescription, right? I mean, not very easy for us, right? Like very challenging. And yet I think I must agree wholeheartedly, that, it's kind of like the change comes from the free will and the choice. And that doesn't mean that even though we make the choice, that we can effectuate the choice, right? But in making the choice, that's our willingness, and our free will choice. And then we recognize, it's beyond us, it's bigger than us. We're, and then we ask for divine help. We ask for the assistance that we need. And when we ask from there, with that willingness, then they can come and help. I mean, the guide says if we don't ask, because we have free will, they have to stay a distance. They can't really intervene. They have to let us try it all by ourselves, which again, is part of why we're frustrated, because we know that doesn't work. So, like, again, the patience is a huge part of it, and a very difficult part of it, the trusting, confident, and patient, kind of waiting is like the strongest difficulty. And sometimes it seems like we're waiting forever and we're praying forever, right? But life is on its own divine timing. And, I think there's a way in which when we can, trust in that as well, even the pain, the patience and the waiting become less difficult. And we can do so with joy. We can do so with presence. We can do so giving thanks and being grateful and enjoying a great life that we have, just as it is, even before we've gotten to this other level. So any questions, comments? This is the absolute prerequisite for change. When it does not even occur to you to assume this prayerful attitude and say, I want to change, but my ego cannot do it, God will do it through me. I will make myself a willing, receptive channel for this to happen. You are basically not willing to change or are doubtful about the reality of the higher forces within you. And it's good to know, which one of those. I mean, so that's a part of the work, right? It's like, again, it's not like just to recognize, oh, there's a block there, I'm bad, like I'm stuck. But to be curious and to question, oh, I see, there's a block there. What is that about? Is it, am I unwilling to change? Why? Am I just really doubting that there is anybody that can out there help me? We usually know the story behind that. We didn't have it before, but yet, like, that's a part of us, an aspect of us. And then maybe there's some other places where we do have faith, where we do have some sense, or we've had experiences of these higher forces within us. And so we can go into a dialogue and bring that to bear, on wherever we're at, and we can, kind of excavate deeper where that stuck place is, and by doing so, free ourselves. This confident, patient waiting or working, this assurance and trust that help will come when you are utterly willing to look at the truth, can be acquired. It is not a childish attitude that wants an authority to do it for you. Quite the contrary, this approach conciliates the attitude of adult self-responsibility that takes action by facing the self with a receptive attitude in which the ego knows its own limitations. In this receptive attitude, wanting truth and change, you let God into your soul from deep within yourself. You open up for it to happen. When this attitude is adopted, change becomes a living reality for anyone and everyone. When trust and faith are lacking that the divine can actualize itself through you, it is because you have not given yourself the opportunity to experience the stark reality of these processes. You have denied yourself this experience. And since you have never experienced it, how can you trust it? Also, since you still have some little escape hatch in reserve, which keeps you from entering into life fully and committedly, you cannot experience the marvel of the reality of the universal spirit within yourself. Since you are not honest with life, you cannot really believe in the power of the universal intelligence dwelling in you at all times, which goes to work the instant you make room for it. So again, this is not a snap of the fingers, but this is all the work that makes it possible. And this is, the journey, and the goal ultimately is to be connected with that universal intelligence dwelling within us. Total commitment to it is necessary without reservation. This commitment is the absolute prerequisite for your discovery of its reality within you. Even if you do not know what the outcome will be, whether or not God's way will be agreeable to you, the commitment must be made. Not knowing the total answer right now is part of it. Considerations of ways that avoid full commitment keep you holding on to the old, distorted, cheating way of life, while still wanting to reach for the new, liberated, free way in which you are whole instead of inwardly divided and racked by the pain of this division. But you cannot have it both ways. Your commitment to the ultimate creator must become total, applied to the most seemingly insignificant aspects of daily living and being. You must be totally committed to the truth, because then you are also committed to the universal spirit. If you thus commit yourself, you will let go of the old accustomed shore and float momentarily in what seems uncertainty. But you will not mind this. You will feel safer than ever before when you are holding on to the old shore, to the false structure that must be torn down. You will soon know that there is nothing to fear. You will need to summon courage to do this, only to find that this is really the safest and most secure way possible to live. It actually requires no courage at all. Then and only then will the dark nights turn into instruments of light. Okay, looks like we have some Q&As. See how far they go. Yep, just one. So, question. This lecture is very close to where I am. I have just begun to discover the meaning of crisis. I feel I either have to take cover somewhere or have to ride through the storm, which I feel I am doing now. Answer. This recognition is very good. It touches upon the age-old alternatives of taking cover or driving through. It is perhaps the most important question on the evolutionary path of each entity. You remain in the cycle of death and rebirth, of pain and struggle, of conflict and strife, physically as well as spiritually and psychologically, precisely because you cling to the illusion that going through can be avoided and escaping will do some good. Actually, taking cover does not do any good. On the contrary, it increases the critical tension. The momentary relief is illusion of the most serious nature. It is so because the crisis inevitably comes later on, but by then is no longer connected with its source, and therefore it hurts more. When you make up your mind, however, saying, I will not take cover, I will go through it, the resources within the human soul will become almost instantly available. Right? The heart, the courage, the willingness, the commitment. These resources remain obscure to those who still tend to escape. Then they feel weak and do not believe in their own capacities to actualize the infinite powers of the universal spirit. It seems to me like we all have areas where we're trying, we're still struggling with escaping, and also tremendous areas of courage and moving forward. It's the first words. Let's see. I lost my place. Oh, here it is. So since you are not honest with life, you cannot really believe in the power of the universal intelligence dwelling in you at all times, which goes to work the instant you make room for it. So I read that right? Let's see. Yeah. So here it is. It actually requires no courage at all when we can, let go of that shore and recognize, hey, we're floating, right? It's kind of the shaman's death as well, right? It's like we have to hold the hand of the child and walk to the edge of the cliff and kind of like to the child self, and maybe even most of us, it seems like we might be just jumping off a cliff and dashing our, life into the rocks. But, when we can do it with some, conscious awareness that it's like we just need the courage to take this leap. And it's terrifying, but, we see that, like if we don't take that leap, we're going to die a long, slow death. It's like this may be a short, quick death. So we might as well jump off a cliff, because we're at this place where we recognize, not jumping is also a death. It's just a long, slow death. And so then something in us, says yes to that change, yes to, making that leap, even though it seems terrifying, and sort of our understanding would be that we would die. And this is when, we actually kind of have that crack in the cosmic egg moment, because we do jump, and then instead of crashing to the, bottom below, we soar, we discover something new happens, right? The change happens. So the guide says this recognition is good. And so we're, actually, the relief, when you make up your mind saying, I will not take cover, I will go through it, the resources within the whole human soul will become almost instantly available. These resources may remain obscure to those who still tend to escape. They then feel weak and do not believe in their own capacities to actualize the infinite powers of the universal spirit. They do not know their potential, the strength that will arise, the inspiration that will come. Only when you decide to go through and ask for help in meditation do these resources become available. So we need to ask for help, and we need to jump. And then you will sense and awaken trust that the conscious ego is not alone, is not the only faculty available to deal with the issue. I bless you, and I ask you to open up your innermost being, your whole soul, all your psychic forces, to let go of the cramp that denies truth and change. Therefore, self-expression and light. Open up in this way to let the blessed power constantly present within you permeate your whole being. A blessing comes forth that will meet with the inner power of which I have spoken, thus doubly strengthening you. Continue your growth so that your wholeness, your connectedness with the universe will grow and give you more of the joy that is inherently your birthright. Be blessed, be in peace. Okay. Stop the share here. Guess we lost That one woman was a Barbara Brennan graduate, so she was familiar with the lectures, but had kind of found it. I guess we were running late for something for her.
No, I think she might have accidentally dropped off.
Oh, you
Yeah.
think it was an accidental?
Yeah.
She put anything in the chat?
Yeah, that's why I think it was an accidental because she didn't think.
Okay. So good. I guess I
Thank
can.
you.
I hope that was, a good one. Again, both of these